machines even exist. Today's video is on the top 5 cloud-generating machines. Number 5. The Taurus molecular cloud machine was invented by the Russian military and is designed to decontaminate soldiers that have been exposed to a chemical agent. It works by shooting high-pressure water into a modified MiG-21 jet engine. This mixes with chemical compounds to create a high-temperature mixture of gas and steam. This gas blows away radioactive particles and destroys infectious agents. A creative solution to a potential chemical attack. Number 4. The government of the UAE is trying new things to create rainfall across their dry desert nation. They came up with an idea to modify the outtake of a plane engine to literally form clouds. This is called cloud seeding, an interesting idea. However, there's not much evidence to suggest their cloud seeding program actually really works. They do create small clouds, but not ones large enough to contain much water. But maybe this technology will develop over time. Number 3. NASA tests a solid rocket booster which they plan to use for future deep space exploration. The chemicals involved in the burn create a dark cloud, large enough to get picked up on weather radar. Number 2. So this machine here, appropriately named Big Wind, is designed to put out oil well fires. It works quite literally by shooting a cloud of water vapor directly into an oil well fire. The combination of water vapor and wind blows the fire right out. Oil well fires are incredibly difficult to control, but this machine is an innovative solution to an impossible problem. And finally, number 1. Engineers at NASA's Stennis Space Center in Mississippi test a new RS-25 rocket engine. The burn lasted for 8.5 minutes, and when finished, a massive cloud loomed over the facility, one of the largest man-made clouds ever created.
cloud seeding equipment right here, and we're gonna get to hear all about how it works and see it in action. Let's check it out. Cloud seeding is the most common type of weather modification, and it has many different techniques and applications. Today, it's mostly used to increase rain and snowfall, reduce the size of hail, and reduce fog at airports.
Traditionally, cloud seeding has been done from the air. So airplanes have had racks on them where these same flares are positioned on the airplane, and the airplane flies into the storm. So in order to reduce the cost to the client and reduce our carbon footprint, we've been able to station these on the ground. Now we can do this in places where weather permits.
Behind a barbed wire fence designed to keep away curious cattle, the cloud seeding gear awaits the right kind of weather.
So these are referred to as AHOGs. That stands for Automated High Output Ground Seeding Systems. We've got three primary components of our equipment here. The first is the control module that you see behind me. Then we have our actual cloud seeding flares. The cameras for security. It also helps us observe weather conditions in real time and make sure that all of the equipment is operating correctly during a storm. Inside these canisters are the flares with the seeding agents. The canisters are used as spark arresters, so they prevent sparks from reaching the ground. So if we pull off the spark arrestor, you can see the flare inside. The ignition of the flares are controlled from the control module that's behind us. So the white triangle there is a cell service modem, and then the solar panel keeps us powered. Inside we have a battery and then a control board. So the control board interacts with the software. We're linked or synced with the software in Utah currently, and that allows us to fire or ignite any of the flares from that remote location.
Because of the lack of clouds and proper wind conditions, today is not a good day for cloud seeding at all. But Garrett and his team are going to light a flare for us anyway, so we can show you how it works. There's just one small problem. The battery in the control module died shortly before we arrived, but it's nothing a little jump start can't fix. After a little juice from Garrett's truck, it's time to set off the flare.
The primary seeding agent in this is silver iodide. Silver iodide is a simple compound. It's polar in nature like water, so there's chemical properties that help attract water molecules to silver iodide. It's also structured molecularly similar to ice. So it helps generate or helps spawn the generation of ice buildup, and then that becomes a hailstone or a snowflake that falls here primarily as rain. So one flare like this has billions and billions of potential sites for that water to congregate around. We'll launch them in sequences. We watch the radar to see when bands of the highest concentration of liquid water are passing above us in the clouds, and we try to target those high concentration pockets in the storm systems. We'll launch between 3 and 20 flares for a typical storm. Once the flare is lit, it takes a little bit of time to carry up into the clouds, and once it's up at the proper elevation, it'll take about 20 minutes to instigate the rain or the snow process. So overall, you're probably looking at about 40 to 45 minutes before you're seeing the maximum result. And that's why we're stationed miles away from our target area. So we have very specific targets that drain directly into major water basins, and we time these events to correlate with rain above those intended targets. One of the biggest questions or most common questions that we receive relates to the safety of silver iodide. Silver is biologically inert, so it will not interact in a negative fashion with plant or animal life. Iodine is actually a critical building block of a number of hormones in animals, so it is safe as well. In fact, if you look at table salt or baby formula, you'll see iodine in its molecular form as an additive in those commonly consumed substances.
But what about other potential adverse effects? Could cloud seeding affect communities outside the targeted areas?
Sometimes there is a concern about robbing Peter to pay Paul. So are we benefiting California at the expense of Nevada? And the truth is that storm systems, when they move over off the coastline, only about 10% of that moisture is going to fall in the form of precip. And we're looking at increasing that to about 11% because we have about a 10% increase in the natural storm's productivity. So going from 10% to 11% in California has an insignificant impact on the amount of precip that will still be available in Nevada or Utah.
Built into the program are kind of checks to make sure that we don't come across anything negative. When there are high intensity storms, we won't seed. If the reservoirs are full, we won't seed. If the rivers are flowing a lot, maybe near flood capacity, we won't seed.
We hope that the conditions that exist right now will turn around and that we will not face the severity of droughts that we're facing, particularly this year. But a number of scientific articles are suggesting otherwise. And as we look into the future, we need to again consider conservation first. So the ability for us just to conserve how we use water and the ways that we store the water. And then layer on that efforts like weather modification and cloud seeding to help increase the rainfall that we do receive. It's very important that we take advantage of every opportunity we have to generate water in a sustainable way.
Anybody who's interested in learning more about cloud seeding, I've got links to scientific
Another question on the in an interview with the Los Angeles Times on April 21st, you said that you told the Associated Press that the American government has created weather tampering techniques so that the New World Order will be able to starve millions of Americans and to control the rest. Would you explain what you were trying to say?
Well, what I was trying to say is exactly what I said. There is weather control techniques. We have a complete package on that, which I did not bring, but I certainly will see to it that it is brought in for the record. Number one, the entire patents on the equipment. Number two, Senator Claiborne Pell's complete statement and story of his own that not only does it exist, but that we even utilize it as far back as the Vietnam War. You might want to touch base with Senator Pell.
I just want to repeat before I turn to
So yes, but we do have all that information.
You're saying the government has created weather tampering techniques so that the, quote, New World Order will be able to starve millions of Americans.
Worldwide.
Millions of Americans, and to control the rest.
Yes, sir, and that's my belief. As bizarre as that sounds, if somebody had told me that that equipment even existed 10 years ago, I would have thought they were nuts, sir. And at this point in time, we have all the documents to prove it, And if you think that 85 tornadoes takes place in the middle of our growing area by simultaneous accident, I'm sorry. With the equipment that's already set up internationally, and as bizarre as that is, it is proven and documented. We will supply you with those documents. As bizarre as that is, I would say that weather wars, and this is quoting actually Senator Claiborne Pell himself, that they are the greatest weapon ever created in the world, and that's the Senator's own statement. So yes, I do stand on that.
Thank you, Ms. Fletcher. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sing about it and definitely complain about it. The weather. But have we come to the point where we can control the weather? Technically, that's still too good to be true, but the winds might be changing. Let's talk about cloud seeding. It's described as the enhancement of natural precipitation. To explain how cloud seeding works, we need to first talk about clouds.
Clouds are a bunch of water droplets or ice crystals floating in the sky. The water droplets are too small to fall as precipitation, but they are large enough to form the clouds we see. In most parts of the world, these droplets are supercooled, meaning they're below freezing, but they remain liquid. Now, sometimes these droplets are just milling around, pushing past each other and not sticking together, kind of like a missed connection. Other times, these droplets bump into each other, like commuters on a train during a busy rush hour. The water vapors collide and stick to particles floating in the air. It could be dust, smoke particles, or even meteoric debris. Those are known as condensation nuclei.
So cloud seeding can produce what we want more or less of, more snow, more rain, or smaller hail pellets. This is done by introducing a seeding agent through pyrotechnic flares attached to an aircraft. Think Roman candles with a mission to deliver those condensation nuclei that encourage more collisions and group huddles by ice crystals inside the cloud. Common seeding agents used are dry ice, the solid form of carbon dioxide, silver iodide, or simple salts like sodium chloride. Seeding agents act as additional ice nuclei. In the case of silver iodide, its structure is very similar to ice. Hexagonal, which is why experts think ice wants to bond to it. When silver iodide is used in a cloud, water droplets begin to give up water vapor and shrink. At the same time, the ice crystals already present in the cloud collect this moisture and grow. As ice crystals bang into other ice crystals, they become larger and heavier until they fall from the cloud. So why would we even want to do this? Who does it benefit?
In the wintertime, increase in snowfall is a very significant value add to organizations like hydropower companies.
Idaho Power Company, for example, is interested in having more snowfall during the winter because this produces more runoff in the springtime for hydroelectricity. Wineries, such as ones in Mendoza, Argentina, have also used cloud seeding to protect their vineyards from damage through hail suppression. And lastly, insurance companies like ones in Alberta fund cloud seeding projects in order to lessen damage claims they receive. So how much does it cost? Well, the cost can vary. Hail is the most expensive. Rain projects less expensive, running $200,000 to $1 million a year, and that might produce an extra 1.5 to 4.5 meters of snow in the mountains, or an extra 50 to 125 millimeters of rain in the summer.
And you compare that to what is in the market price for water, or comparable technologies in creating more surface and groundwater, that is desalinization, groundwater recharge, some of these, or even building dams and infrastructure, we're a fraction of that cost.
So now that we know how it works, here are some myths busted. Why don't they cloud seed to extinguish forest fires? Because you can't create rain with cloud seeding. You can only enhance clouds that are already present. Can cloud seeding resolve droughts? Not really, because all precipitation requires clouds. If it's already dry, there won't be enough moisture to rise in the air. No clouds, no extra moisture, no chance of enhancement. However, what can be done is to increase snow production and rainfall when there are clouds to work with. In other words, it needs to be preemptive. But does it work? In 2008, Beijing claimed that they made it rain early with cloud seeding to ensure blue skies with the Olympic opening ceremony. In contrast, the American Meteorological Society released a statement in 2010 saying there's still uncertainty whether current cloud seeding techniques actually work to achieve the desired changes in precipitation. According to the World Meteorological Organization, 52 countries have a weather modification program, and many of them continue to boost funding for such operations, all in an effort to perhaps one day control the weather.
Thanks for watching Global News. If you enjoyed what you just saw, please like the video.
Also hit climate change yesterday, and now we're learning that scientists and researchers are looking at how to change the weather on purpose. That's right. Lasers now could one day manipulate rain and lightning. CBS This Morning contributor Michio Kaku is a physics professor at City College of New York. Professor, nice to see you. Extraordinary seeing Al Gore and Bill Clinton there together with Charlie, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, they did not get into this discussion, though. But it is fascinating. I mean, lasers, really, to change the weather?
That's right. Well, as Mark Twain once famously said, everyone complains about the weather, but no one ever does anything about it. Well, instead of doing a rain dance, we physicists are firing trillion-watt lasers into the sky to actually precipitate rain clouds and actually bring down lightning bolts. This is potentially a game changer.
But this is experimental.
It's experimental. However, in the laboratory so far it works. When you have water vapor and you have dust particles or ice crystals, you can precipitate rain. It condenses around the seeds. These seeds can also be created by laser beams. By firing trillion-watt lasers, you rip apart the electrons, creating what are called ions, and these ions act like seeds, like dust particles, bringing down rain and even lightning.
Go ahead.
Well, this fascinates me in part because, too, I remember reading the stories that China had used this during the Olympics, that the USSR had used this after Chernobyl to create rain clouds. I mean, did those really work then? We have some of these capabilities now?
Inconclusive. Even in the 60s, the CIA used this to bring down monsoons during the Vietnam War, to wash out the Viet Cong. Governments have been playing with this thing.
Alleged to.
Alleged to, right.
Yeah.
Now, we realize that for decades now, these governments have been alleged to have experimented with weather control, but nothing conclusive. This time we're bringing in the laws of physics rather than simply waving our hands and uttering mumbo jumbo. We're actually using trillion-watt lasers now. And in the laboratory, sure enough, they precipitate rain out of water vapor. Sure enough, you can actually bring down electricity down the beam.
So what does it mean for drought areas that need to have rain for crops, and if they don't have them, there's the consequences of famine?
Well, the bad news is if it's a clear blue sky, it's not going to do anything at all because it only takes water vapor that's already in the air and condenses it. However, for floods, for agriculture, farmers, for people planning wedding parties, football games, you name it, outdoor events and agriculture and flooding and even hurricanes, all of them could be subject to weather modification.
Incredibly interesting. Professor Michio Kaku, thank you so much.
Okay, so we talked about this last week, and now we're going to do a deep dive with Davo. Dubai is making it rain in a sweltering desert by zapping clouds with electricity using drones.
Fascinating, isn't it?
So much to ask, but let's take it, and then we'll do a few questions.
Before we talk about what's happening in Dubai, let's talk about cloud seeding in general, because a lot of people, I don't think, understand what cloud seeding is. And this has been going on for decades, by the way. This is not something that's brand new. But traditionally, what cloud seeding is, it involves using aircraft or drones or even some cannons to push silver iodide up high into the clouds. Why silver iodide? Because that has the same crystallized structure as ice. So once it gets up into the clouds, it starts to accumulate ice on it and these large raindrops, which helps, especially in a cloud mass that's not really going to rain. It helps to bring rain and especially snow down.
So it works.
It does work. Marginally. But the problem with silver iodide through the years has been this, is that they feel it could be harmful to aquatic life. Okay. So over in Dubai, which is what you're seeing here, they took it a different step, and what they basically did, they had a fleet of drones that flew up into cloud cover, and they used electrical charges to force water droplets to combine into larger ones.
So not cloud seeding as we know.
No, they're not using the traditional silver iodide, which takes out the environmental aspect of that, okay? So they're using just electricity to create larger raindrops. Why larger raindrops? Because in Dubai, they only average about 4 inches of rain per year, as most of the rain that falls out of the clouds evaporates. Because it's so hot, it's so dry, and the water molecules are so tiny. So they're trying to stimulate by using electricity these droplets to be larger. Hence, they can make it to the ground. Now, I will tell you that the jury is still kind of out a bit on whether or not this was a fluke, whether this is something that can work long term. So they need to continue with these drones, and they're going to continue to do this. Yes, Mr. Rhodes?
So, assuming it works and it wasn't a fluke, why not use this out in the western U.S. where all these wildfires are and the drought is going on? Could this not help us
That's
here?
a fantastic question, and they've been trying. This is stuff that, first of all, it's very expensive too. You're talking about millions and millions of dollars, which is fine when you're trying to alleviate a drought.
Sure.
It cannot work with wildfires. Here's the thing. You can't just throw silver iodide or electricity into a clear sky and it rains. It doesn't work that way. You have to have the right cloud structure, the right cloud height. They have to be tall, getting up well into the freezing layers. Then you can try to stimulate that process. And they've done that out west. During the winter time when they get days and days of cloud cover, they've done that, and they've noticed they've been able to increase the snowfall pack 5 to 15%. But the area and the weather, Russell, around wildfires is not conducive to that type of cloud cover, so you can't do it. In other words, we need to treat the drought, which will then alleviate the wildfires. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And that's the way it has to go. 5 to 15% increase in precipitation out west due to this. It's a start.
Okay.
And it's a good start, especially over in Dubai for those folks who are just trying to generate more rainfall. Now, on the opposite side about, oh, we're done. We don't need more time.
Another time. We'll pick it up another time.
China is now looking at the skies. It has revealed plans to drastically expand on experimental weather modification program covering an area of more than 1.5 times the total size of India. China has long sought to control the weather by seeding clouds. The process works by injecting small amounts of chemicals like silver iodide into clouds, causing them to precipitate. The technology has been used to create artificial rain and snow, but the massive push, ostensibly for domestic use, is sending alarm bells ringing in India, especially in the context of the recent conflicts across the line of actual control. There are fears that weather modification could potentially give China an edge, hampering troop movements in the mountainous regions. We spoke to environmental security expert Dr. Dhanashree Jairam earlier. Listen in to what she had to say.
Okay, so China's weather modification system, which they have been working on for a really long period of time. So this is not new, that the State Council has now released a statement which says that by 2025, they're going to cover an area for cloud seeding and also hail suppression, relatively lesser amount of area to cover hail suppression system, but at least for the cloud seeding, creating rainfall, that kind of a system they are trying to put in place by 2025, and by 2035 they are expected to advance it to such a level that they would be leading the world in terms of cloud seeding geoengineering schemes. So this is what they are planning according to the latest statement of the State Council that was released a couple of days ago. But like I said, this is not new. They have been trying these kind of technologies for a really long period of time. Since China is a country that is also very much susceptible, vulnerable to changes that are happening in the climate, that are basically also creating a sense of insecurity among the Chinese as far as the impacts of climate change on its agricultural sector, other sectors that are dependent on water. So as you know, the northern parts of China are comparatively arid and semi-arid, while the southern part, especially the Tibetan Plateau, is extremely water-rich. And therefore, their idea is to kind of transfer the water from the southern parts to the northern parts, which are facing a lot of water scarcity. So by weather modification, they're trying to, for instance, transfer water from the Yangtze River to the Yellow River. As you know, there have been also plans discussed by the Chinese previously with regard to the South-North Diversion Project, how much of it has actually become fructified, or how much of it has actually materialized, is still questionable, considering the fact that the Chinese are not very transparent when it comes to sharing data and information regarding their large-scale projects. Now, these kind of geoengineering projects are in fact something that the Chinese have invested in for a long period of time, and of course, now they must also be looking at solar radiation management, carbon dioxide removal, those kind of projects which are much more alarming than the cloud seeding kind of geoengineering projects. But the scale of the project itself, as discussed by China, is something that is alarming because of the kind of impact it could have on the ecosystems, it could have on the neighboring countries, especially with the monsoon patterns being affected. And of course, the rivers which flow down from the Tibetan Plateau to South Asia and Southeast Asia, and the populations living in these regions are entirely dependent on these rivers. So some of these questions are still unanswered. And China being China, they have a tendency to carry out some of these unilateral measures, which can, of course, create some sort of conflict.
Are known for their wonderful snow, but sometimes Mother Nature needs a hand in making it. Here's how one Alberta ski resort helps her out.
It's a magical thing. You put this pressurized hose of water in here on one side with this compressed air coming in a tube in the back. And then you get Mother Nature's cold air, let's go with -3 or cooler, and you combine all that inside of here with a little dust particle called a nucleator. Yeah, it's got a bond on something. And once they all meet up, they party like crazy, and then they shoot out this cannon-like gun out into the air and make a tremendous amount of snow. And we're talking acres and acres of snow.
Here at Nakiska Ski Resort, Mother Nature returned the favor this year, bringing cool temps sooner than expected.
Early cold air with moisture from the Pacific, and that made a massive amount of natural snow. And then that cold air stayed, and we were able to fire up these babies to make a tremendous amount of man-made snow.
At Nakiska Ski Resort, Deb Matichka.
It has already been shown that the temperature in northeast China was between 7 and 9 degrees warmer than present during the early Holocene, which is over 7,000 years ago, when carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere drifted at around 260 parts per million. There are over 400 parts per million now. Despite that, now the latest evidence from 2 new studies also indicates that northeast China was between 2 and 3 degrees warmer during the mid-1800s than it is today, suggesting this region has cooled by 2 to 3 degrees over the last 170 years of global warming. Not that the Chinese are remotely concerned, as the Chinese communists embark on building around 1,000 new coal-fired power stations so they can build lots of steel. I wonder what for. But never fear. If there's one thing the Chinese communists believe in, it's absolute control over all aspects of life, including, apparently, the weather. Yes, apparently China is developing a high-tech satellite-based weather control system called River in the Sky that will allow it to move water vapor through man-made corridors in the sky. This is in addition to their cloud seeding programs that involve shooting missiles filled with salt and minerals into the sky, based on an original idea by Kate Bush. Of course, one way of gauging whether the climate is changing or not is by how soon or how late in any given calendar year a particular temperature first occurs. An example, earlier this week, Ottawa recorded its first 5 degrees Celsius of the year, meaning winter is receding. But the first 5 degrees Celsius of the year is normally around January the 13th, 7 weeks ago. And the earliest 5 degrees Celsius recorded in Ottawa was January the 1st in both 1876 and 2012, meaning those winters were much shorter way back then. By this measure, this year has been one of Ottawa's longest and coldest winters. Similarly, Tony Heller tweeted this week from Colorado, "We had nearly a foot of snow on June 8 and September 8 last year, expecting another 3 feet this week. Global warming is making our winters 9 months long." Meanwhile, Climate Change Dispatch reports that the sea ice extent in the Antarctic on December 2020 and January 2021 can be described as normal. Don't tell Unilever, normal's a naughty word these days. And finally, the cracks in the British monarchy aren't just being caused by Meghan and Harry's interview. The turret at Nebworth House is also cracking. But who's to blame? Let me guess. Yes, a new report says the new cracks in the 15th century home, which was used as a location in the Crown and in the King's speech, are thought to be associated with climate change. Of course, Nebworth House was once owned by Sir Edward Bulwer Lytton, famous for coining not only the phrase, "the pen is mightier than the sword," but also the phrase, "it was a dark and stormy night." "It was a dark and stormy night" is a phrase that should put the fear of God into Matt Keane and all those solar panel enthusiasts, as well as being the perfect opening sentence that has tormented so many novel writers ever since.
So Margaret's a big star. That's life. This is life too. That goes on, this goes on. The night was hot. Wait, no. The night was humid. The night was humid. No, wait. Hot. The night was hot. The night was hot and wet. Wet and hot. The night was wet and hot. Hot and wet. Wet and hot. That's humid. The night was humid. Maybe the night isn't humid. See, maybe the night isn't humid. Maybe it was humid in the morning and at night it was cold. That gives you fog. The night was foggy. The night...
This huge facility to test out their rocket engines. Every time they conduct a test, an enormous amount of hydrogen and oxygen gets mixed together. As a result, these engines are basically pumping water vapor into the atmosphere. After about an hour, this water vapor will eventually fall back down as rain.
Sitting in the middle of a man-made lake in Queensland, Australia, sits a giant machine that creates waves designed for surfing. The giant wave machine uses a large metal donut to generate concentric swells in the centre of a lagoon. The metal donut itself is filled with ballast to weigh it down, and is so heavy it weighs 1,400 tonnes, or as much as 3 Boeing 747s. Using compressed air, it's pushed upwards. When dropped, its shape displaces a perfect ring of water that travels outwards, until hitting several man-made reefs, creating different height surfing waves. This man-made lake is the first of its kind in Australia, and is so large it's the largest surfing lagoon in the world. The wave pool creates multiple waves of varying difficulty, length and size that happen simultaneously, and at full capacity it can produce up to 2,400 waves per hour. Visitors can choose between 5 different areas and wave types, such as gentle rolling waves for beginner surfers, all the way up to fast and demanding waves for experts and pro surfers. Plus, the lake is designed so all 5 waves can be surfed simultaneously in different sectors around the lake. In the future, Surflakes hopes to produce a perfect 8-foot barreling wave. When that happens, it will become the biggest man-made wave ever created. Now, unfortunately, Surflakes is not open to the public. This is simply a test site for demonstration purposes. Surflakes' plan is to license their 5-wave technology around the world, such as to standalone surf parks or incorporated into resorts and theme parks. Since Surflakes started demonstrating the wave pool, they have received over 150 inquiries from more than 25 countries around the world. So until it's available at your local theme park, I guess we'll just have to surf the old-fashioned way, at the beach. Well, if you've ever needed another reason to come to Australia, we have over 11,000 beaches, so take your pick. Anyway, that's the end of this video.
Presents. If you see square waves in the ocean, get out of the water immediately. Help us spread the word about this very important message by clicking that like button and sharing this video with your friends and family. Also, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss our future videos. Most of our planet is covered by water. The oceans are so vast that much of the ocean has never even been explored. The oceans have gone so unexplored, scientists and other researchers are still discovering new species of sea life even today. Under the water, you can find shipwrecks and underwater graveyards for airplanes. There are some things about the ocean that we do know, other things that are still mysteries. The ocean around the Isle of Ré in France is very unique. What the ocean does at times can be amazing, but if you see square waves in the ocean, get out of the water immediately. Getting out of the water before the waves begin to form this pattern could save your life. The Isle is a popular tourist spot due to its blue oceans, sandy beaches, and the amazing lighthouses. The island is 3 miles wide, 19 miles long. What brings many of the tourists to the area is the pattern that the waves around the ocean makes. The waves are unlike any other. Most waves come in towards the shore in a horizontal fashion, and that's not the case with waves near this island. They actually create a chessboard-like pattern on the surface. If you look at the waves from above, it looks as though there is a metal grid underneath the water. The square waves are not a result of anything under the water. They're actually a result of the way that the water is moving. When you climb to the top of the lighthouse, you can get an amazing view of this. The reason why this occurs is due to the intersection of 2 seas located near the island. It's known as a cross sea. A certain weather pattern around the sea causes the waves to form this way. While the waves may look amazing, you do not want to be in the water when they form this shape. It's because the riptide is extremely powerful when this happens. The riptides that create this wave pattern are nothing like anything you've ever seen before. You don't hear about people being dragged out to sea in these riptides because the locals know how dangerous it can be to get in the water when the waves form this shape. The locals know enough to steer clear. Many of the tourists who have come to see the waves, they've heard about the dangers and they know enough to stay out of the water as well while the waves are behaving this way. There have been people who have gone out into the ocean when the waves created this, and fortunately they managed to get out of the water safely. One man was photographed swimming in the middle of one of the squares. What makes these chessboard waves so amazing is that this is the only place in the world where you can see this phenomenon. There are millions of small islands all over the world, none of them create waves like these. Fortunately, the waves in this area don't always flow this way. Most of the time, the waters are very safe. The cross-sea occurs during certain types of weather, so the ocean can be safe for swimming most of the time. If you're planning to visit to enjoy this gorgeous beach, just make sure you check the weather forecast first. These waves are just another example of how amazing Mother Nature can be at times. Sure, Mother Nature can be harsh when it comes to natural disasters. Hurricanes, tsunamis, tornadoes, blizzards, and thunder and lightning, it's all been responsible for total devastation time and time again. As severe as nature can be at times, it can also be wondrous. These waves are a perfect example of that. When looking from above, they are an amazing sight. If you're in the water, though, it is another matter altogether. It's amazing how something so beautiful can be so dangerous and cause so much devastation at the same time. However, that's not uncommon when it comes to Mother Nature. If you're planning to take a trip to France, you should make it a point to visit this isle. If you're lucky, you might just have a chance to see this natural phenomenon in person. It looks incredible in photos, but in person it is breathtaking. Just